Star Wars Squadrons. Does it have depth? Does it require skill? And is it better than Battlefront's air gameplay? Let's take a look. Well, so far I've had about 5.5 hours of game time, and most of that has been spent on the multiplayer mode. If you're wondering about whether or not this game is worth picking up purely for the single player and you have no interest whatsoever in the multiplayer, I would probably say that at $40 you're better off waiting for a discount. Now, there's nothing wrong with the single player from what I've experienced, which isn't a lot. I've only done the prologue and the first mission, but it just isn't anything special from what I've heard. It's only 6 hours long. But for this video, I'm going to be concentrating on the multiplayer mode specifically, since that's where most of your time will be spent with this game, and that's really the main meat of the game. Okay, so firstly, is it better than Battlefront? Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. There are a lot more systems at work here that have to be managed and mastered than those of Battlefront. But is there enough depth in these systems and the ship loadout system, and does it require enough skill to really keep players, coming back for game after game, or will it just get boring quickly and fade away like many other games do? So let's talk about mechanics first, and then we'll get into the loadout system, and then finally the game modes and maps. So let's start with speed management, because for me personally, I come from a background of playing Battlefield, and I know a lot of my subs here on YouTube do as well, and that game has a pretty skill-heavy speed control system for flying the jets. So in Squadrons, your speed is mainly managed by your throttle, which is the bar you can see farthest to the left there. So if you keep your throttle around midway, that will give you the fastest turning speed, which is useful for, evading enemy missiles and dogfighting enemy fighters. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be the best speed to have. Sometimes you want to catch up to an enemy fighter or put some space between you and your tail, in which case full throttle is your best bet. And at other times, I found that lowering my throttle allowed for more stability to aim at my target and get that all-important kill shot. But obviously, that comes with the trade-off that if somebody comes behind you and takes you by surprise, you're going to be a really easy target. So secondly, you have the power management system. So your ship's power can be redistributed to 3 different subsystems in your fighter: engines, weapons, and shields. Although some ships don't have shields, like the TIE fighter, so in that case, your only choices are going to be engines and weapons. Now, the more power you put into engines, the faster your ship will go. The more power you put into weapons, the quicker your laser cannons will recharge, and the more power you put into shields, the quicker your shields recharge. So what you can do is customize these on the fly in a number of ways. For simple controls, you can simply just press keys 1, 2, or 3 to max out the slider for any given system, and then hitting 4 will simply divide power equally among all 3 systems. But you can also turn on an option that allows for each slider to be adjusted incrementally for the optimal setup. Now, the great thing about this though is that the optimal setup for each situation is completely different, so you really need to get used to changing these systems around, and often they go hand in hand with your throttle as well. So as an example for me, I found that when I have an enemy fighter behind me and I need to shake him, putting all my power into engines and dropping my throttle to 50% for the maximum turning speed is the best bet, and that's going to make you the most agile. Now, on the flip side, if I'm closing in on an enemy fighter, but he hasn't noticed me yet and I want to take him out nice and quickly, I'll drop my throttle down for extra stability and then put all my power into weapons so that I can blast him out of space without them having to recharge before I've even killed him. I do have to say that to me, it feels easier to fly the ships that don't have any shields, purely because that's another whole system on top of the power system and throttle that you don't have to worry about. So in the fighters with shields, you can direct your shields to the front or the back with a flick of the mouse wheel, or simply redistribute them equally by clicking the mouse wheel. So when an enemy fighter gets on your tail, you have to do 3 things: flick your shields to the rear, maximize your engine power, and put your throttle to mid, and then start doing evasive maneuvers. It's a lot to think about at once, especially if you're a new player. But that's where the skill level in this game comes in, and you definitely do get a good feeling when you take out an enemy player of like, yeah, I just played better than that guy, and I have a better understanding of the game mechanics. And I can assure you, when you start playing this game, if you do, you will die a lot. There is a pretty steep learning curve. Now, another big skill feature is of course aiming. So the way aiming works in Squadrons is like this. The further from the center crosshair your mouse or joystick is, the quicker you will start to turn in that direction. So whilst dogfighting, your mouse will be all the way to the edge, and if you're trying to line up a kill shot, it will be closer to the center, so you can make small incremental changes. You do have to lead your target in this game, and once you've lined up correctly, your crosshair will turn red, indicating that you're leading the target enough to hit them. Now, outside of your primary lasers, you also have two auxiliary modules, and these can be anything from repair systems to homing missiles. So the missile system isn't too bad here. I always fear, whenever I see homing missiles, that they'll be way too easy to use and kind of a new, friendly, overpowered weapon. But basically, you have to keep your reticle over your target until you get a lock and then simply fire away. But for the fighter trying to dodge the missile, you've got two options. So either use your countermeasures, of which you have a limited number, or simply start pulling evasive maneuvers like you would in a dogfight, which usually loses the missiles. So that leads us nicely onto the loadout section. So for each faction you have 4 different ships. Fighters, which are sort of an all-rounder that's decent at everything, a bomber that has heavy weapons and armor but is a bit less mobile, an interceptor that's fast and nimble with lower armor, and a support ship that's meant to aid their squadron by empowering abilities and disrupting the enemy. And then there are a ton of weapons, auxiliaries, and other upgrades to be unlocked here, and on top of that, they all seem refreshingly different. So some of the laser cannons can be charged up and fired in a very powerful burst as a sort of complete hit or complete miss. Others can be fired rapidly, but have pretty poor range. So they've always got pros and cons. And, there are similar trade-offs for things like hull and engine upgrades. Say a hull upgrade gives you 20% more armor, it might come at the expense of 10% less speed and 10% less maneuverability. I also really appreciate the fact that all the attributes for your ship, like acceleration or top speed for example, are all represented numerically instead of just with a bar, and you can see what effect your loadout is having on them. Also, did I mention that there are no microtransactions? How refreshing is it to see a game without any of those for a change, and especially from EA? There's still plenty of cosmetics for you to unlock though, like clothing for your character, or, little jingly baubles to hang from your cockpit. Now, as you play more and level up, you'll accumulate 2 currencies, Glory, which can be used to unlock cosmetics, and Requisition, which can be used to unlock loadout items. So what about the game modes then? Well, I would say that this is where the game is lacking the most. You've basically got 2 modes at the moment. The first is Dogfight, which is essentially 5v5 team deathmatch on one of 2 maps. One of them is a swirly nebula type map that's completely open with no obstacles, and the other one is absolutely full of shipwrecks and rogue asteroids and whatnot. Basically stuff you can crash into that forces you to be really careful dogfighting in there. But that game mode is really just there to act as training wheels for the next game mode, and arguably the funnest experience that can be had in Squadrons, and that is fleet battles. So in fleet battles, you have to defend your team's starship and 2 cruisers whilst going after the enemy team's starship and their cruisers. So this is a 5v5 game mode, and destroying enemy players or enemy AI fighters awards your team with morale. So think of morale as which way the battle is swinging. If it's in the enemy's favour, you need to fall back and defend, and if it's in your favour, then feel free to push the attack. So your goal here is to keep your team's morale in good standing and then push the enemy starship. You get a little bit of morale for taking out an enemy AI ship, more morale for taking out enemy players, and then a massive chunk of morale for taking out either of the 2 enemy cruisers. Now once the cruisers are dead, you can then move on to attacking the starship, which has certain weak points like the shield subsystem that can be targeted and destroyed to weaken it. But ultimately, as long as you kill it, the game is yours. Now you can also return to your own team's cruisers to repair and restock if you run out of ammo, or you can return to your own starship to change to a different class of ship as the match progresses. So depending on what ship you're using, you're probably going to be fulfilling a different role. So in this game, I was playing in an interceptor, so I basically just went after the enemy players all game long to build our team's morale and keep them off of our bombers. That way our bombers were free to go after the enemy starship, since they will do the most damage. This game mode is also ranked, and you have to complete 10 placement matches before being put into a competitive bracket. I think this is nice, but I also find it a bit weird that there isn't an unranked mode that you can play in for those players who just don't want to be sweaty tryhards all the time. Okay, so final thoughts here. Overall, I came into this game with pretty minimal expectations. I'm honestly not a massive Star Wars fanboy, but I do like flying aircraft in games, and especially ones that have a deep learning curve where I feel like I'm being rewarded for improving my skills at the game. And I have to say, I've been pleasantly surprised so far. I definitely get this feeling with Squadrons. Right now as I sit here recording this video, I do have that familiar feeling of wanting to jump right back into Squadrons for another placement match, you know, see what bracket I end up in, and consequently get my ass handed to me by better players than myself. But overall, for $40, I think they just need more content. The loadout system is more than enough, and the maps they have are nice, but there's only 2 of them for each game mode. I mean, 2? Seriously? At this rate, people will get bored of flying the same maps very quickly. Also, the fact that there are no microtransactions here does make me wonder whether EA plan to keep this title alive going into the future, or if it's a what you see is what you get type deal. In any case, I'm enjoying my time with the game so far. I haven't tried the VR mode yet, but I'll do that soon. I might even throw up another video on that. I also feel like I've learned a hell of a lot about how to do better in multiplayer. So if you're a new player and you're having a really tough time, don't worry, keep your chin up because the learning curve is pretty steep. I might even make a guide of sorts for it once I've accumulated enough experience. Right guys, I am going to leave it there for today. Let me know your thoughts down below as always. Are you playing the game? Are you considering it? And what do you think of it so far? Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.